one though is its twin. This is a similar panel, probably from the same piece of furniture. I did have about half a dozen of these, and this is one that I bought to one of these demos. I don't know the last one I did. It wasn't that long ago. It was sometime earlier this year, and I started to clean it, and then I started to French polish it. And again, that's been back in the workshop again, so it has been scratched and dented. But this is going to be ideal to go through some of those processes. I bought some just bare timber. That's a piece of ash on here. I'm just going to be doing a few different product tests on that, some waxes, some hard wax oils. I've got a bag over. I didn't get it actually behind the counter. I'm going to get that in a minute. That's got a few of the fiddes hard wax oil samples in it, and it's got some different coloured waxes. So I'll do that as the evening wears on.
Probably. Can I take a seat?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, go straight. There's one left. Yeah, well done. And then some of these bits are samples that I use for customers. So this is a piece of reclaimed flooring. It's a 19th century Douglas fir pine floor, and the particular customer wanted a washed out look. They wanted that kind of live type look. It's a caustic effect, but you can't really go into someone's house and chuck buckets of caustic everywhere because it's going to do a lot more damage than good. So we try and achieve. I do use caustic, but in a workshop environment or even outside of my garden where I can stand it up, I can wash it off with a hose pipe. You can work with those, but there's certain things you just can't do inside someone's house. So I work with other products and I try and achieve what would look like a caustic wash. And then I put a protective finish on there, but with a matte finish, it looks as if there's nothing really, it just looks like it's been washed out. But there are, I mean, you've got B and C there, that's one coat and two coats, it's small difference, but they knew what they wanted, so I kind of, the four different samples, they kept to them, the four different samples were all going to be in the same ballpark. So sometimes I'll do four samples that are completely different if someone doesn't know what they want, like with light and dark and shiny and matte examples. If they know what they want and they just kind of need a little bit of a push in the right direction, then what they're going to get is quite similar. I thought, again, this is, in fact, that's one I did at one of these demonstrations as well. So I've just sanded the other side. I'm going to play about with that while you watch to get some colour onto it and get some finish on it. Some of the finishes that we use, like this, I mean, this is a prime example. This is Rubio Monocoat. It's quite new to me. It's quite new to Yandles. The guys came along and said, "Would you start our finish?" And they were a bit dubious because they didn't know anything about it. So they gave it to me. I messed about with it for a day, and I came back and I said, "Yeah, this stuff's really good. I like it." It's a 7-day dry time on it. It's 21-day dry time without all the accelerates. So accelerates would be next with it. So it's a long dry time. It's the sort of thing that if you've got a project, you really need to diarise that. You need to plan ahead and make sure if you're doing a floor, for example, then with even 7 days, and that's a lot. That's quite a long time to wait. So you need to make sure you don't need to use that room. You haven't left your phone on the windowsill or something, because that's the classic nightmare. You have to get very good at Tom Cruise sort of skating across the room by ropes. But it's a really good finish. It's a one coat finish. Most of the finishes I use aren't one coat. The very nature of them is that you need to put on, let's say, with hard wax oil, 2 to 3 coats to get the level of protection. French polish, who knows? I don't know. It's in the high hundreds or even thousands of coats that you can use. I'll sort of demonstrate that in a minute. But and the hard wax oil again, there's a 6 to 8 hour dry time on coat number 1. Coat number 2 is usually a little bit less because I think the fact that it's kind of done all this reacting with the timber, it's done all this moving, so but it's the sort of thing that I can't demonstrate a huge amount here because all I'm going to have is a wet piece of wood. I can't pass it around, everyone's going to get it all over. So you just have to talk about them and give you as much theory as possible. But generally speaking, this is general. When it comes to finishing, for me anyway, my personal opinion on finishing is that most of the processes are the same. You can learn and perfect one way of putting a finish on, and that should be applicable to most different types of finish, be it oil, hard wax oil, varnish. I approach them all in the same way, and that way would certainly be thinner rather than thicker when it comes to the coats, and more rather than less. So apart from this one, which does insist on one coat, and that's fine. They've developed that, and that's their kind of selling card. most of the other ones, with Osmo, it says 2 to 3 coats. I go for 3, maybe even a 4. And I just apply them as thin as I possibly can, get as much coverage as I can, and you hold it up to the light. When you're finishing a piece of timber, look at it and you'll see in certain lights you can it's a little bit lighter on finish there than it is here. And you just make sure that you've got a really consistent finish. And then I cut back between each coat. And by cut back, I mean taking a fine silicon carbide paper, which I use. That's the sort of light grey stuff. That's 500 grit, so that's quite a fine grit as they go. The cutting back between coats, the coarsest grit I would use would be 320. And I apologise if this is going over a lot of people's heads, but that's just how many pieces of grit there are per square inch. So 500, they're tiny. This is really smooth. I also use these. Again, these are sold here. These are called Merlon pads. They're a synthetic abrasive. So they act in the same way as steel wool, but instead of having some of the negative effects that steel wool has, like turning over black when it oxidizes it, or even just giving off little fine particles of dust that are then sort of noxious. And I do use steel wool, and I love steel wool, but you do have to be careful. But this is the synthetic variant. It comes in green, which is extra coarse, which I don't use to finish in 740. Red, which is the sort of medium grit, which I would use for a really hard rub back. And then this is the finer grit, which is equivalent to 320. And it's just slightly different. It's one of those things with finishing. You have to find your own level. You have to find your own preference. Yours might be different to mine. It doesn't make either right or wrong. If you practice and practice and practice, you'll find which products you like, and you should be able to narrow them down. My workshop is crammed full of every different finish, colour, abrasive, all the different things you can imagine, because I do it all day, every day, and I have done for nearly 30 years. But most people at home wouldn't need that amount of stuff. You find what works best for you and stick to it and perfect it and just work with it. So any wood turners out there, or any box makers, do practice. Try and buy samples. We sell samples here. Most places that stock anything sell sample variants, just like when you're testing paint on a wall or something. You don't want to spend hundreds of pounds on big cans there. You get samples. So play about with those samples, and you might didn't get on with that. Fine, discount it. Move on to something else, and you should be able to settle on something that fits you. It becomes your finish, and it can become your selling point. If you go to craft fairs, if you make, as I say, boxes, lovely projects to do, turned items, it can become your finish. And there's a cabinet maker out there. I can't remember who this was exactly, but it's someone, a well-known cabinet maker. He dedicates, when he's making a piece, the same amount of hours to the finish as he does to making the piece, which sounds incredible. But actually, I can relate to that. I wouldn't say maybe I spent exactly the same amount of time, but let's say, desks is something I used to make a lot. I used to love to make writing desks. They're just a really nice visual item. They're practical. Most people these days have got laptops, but they're perfect for that. They've got a drawer, 4 legs, top. You make them from any amount. You can make one pattern so many different ways with so many different symbols, so many different finishes. But actually, it would take me about 40 hours to make a normal working week, to go from a rough piece of rough timber like this to a finished, really beautiful desk, table legs, dovetail drawers, all of that stuff. And 40 hours for finishing is also about right. And that would include the initial preparation. So sanding, when you finish making a piece, the sanding and the preparation comes under finishing for me. That is where the making ends and the finishing begins. So spending a whole day sanding a piece that you've made, it isn't unrealistic. Maybe for a small box, but that's the kind of way we need to be thinking, because another thing finishing does is magnify everything. It magnifies the grain, so that improves and enhances. But if you've got cross-grained scratches or a little dent that you didn't realise you had, that's going to enhance that as well. It is going to magnify every little mistake. So the preparation, working through those sanding grits, I normally start with about 120 grit. So off a plane, I'd go to 120, 180, and 240, and I'd probably start finishing on top of 180 or 240 for anyone that uses those sort of papers. That's when I start to apply a finish, and then I'd go into 320s and 400s between beds.
Is it true that if you go higher in the grades,
it won't penetrate.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I knew a cabinet maker that used to sand and start going into 320s and sanding it. For me, that is just creating you're burnishing the surface then, and you're actually starting to close that grain up, and it isn't going to accept certainly stains would really struggle to penetrate if you went too high, too shiny, too soon. And it's the same with finishes. So yeah, good question. So for me, 180 is about perfect to stop at to then start applying the finishes. And then between the coats, you don't want to be taking off, you don't want to rub through any staining you've done. So I wouldn't go any coarser than 320 when I've actually started applying the finish. And it does take time, you know. So a dining tabletop or even a coffee table you might have made, something that might be 3 to 4 feet by 18 inches to 2.5 feet. So it's quite a small surface, smaller than this table. But cutting back between coats is something that I would spend half an hour to an hour on, even on certain length sizes. This is an important part of the process, is it is perfecting that finish. Even if you're only doing a 3-coat finish, spending time between coats is just as important. And again, so that's when I'll send a reserve fine for this really. Pass that round. So there's 2 different finishes. You've got a fumed and limed finish on the one side, that's that side there. So this would be maybe a floor, but this applies to furniture or anything else. On the other side, there's just stain and hard wax on it. You feel that in the fingers that you've done. So that's all applied with brushes. There's no French polishing on that. That is a hard wax oil that you can buy here. But spending that time between coats with the 320 grit and then vacuuming it off.
You say brush. Is that a bristle brush?
Yeah. So hard wax oil, I usually use those synthetic bristle brushes. I've got ones. Here. Just one of these. They're not the cheapest, but they're not the most expensive either. This is the sort of if you any hard line, probably shouldn't say it, but anyway, other DIY places are available, and I'd recommend them actually. But this is a synthetic bristle brush. I really like these. They don't chop a lot. They're pretty smooth to the touch. Natural bristle is really, really good. I find with hard wax oil, they just shed a lot of bristles in the forever. Even if you spend time beating those bristles out, they still shed. These don't tend to, and they're just smooth enough. So it's one of these type of brushes that achieve that finish. But it's the cutting back between coats, even after the very, very last coat. So when I do a floor, for example, you could have a floor this size. I've got a machine, a 16-inch disc, rotary machine, which can sand polishes as well. But I use things much like this between coats, so that would be the equivalent of 320. And obviously, I can blitz through a large floor in about, I don't know, an hour or something like that, and then the next coat, a little vacuum obviously, and the next coat goes on. So anyone that's got finishing in mind, so again, what's most people's discipline? If I ask a few people at a time, so for example, let's put your hands up, wood stems, how many wood stems are there? So about a third. What about cabinet makers, box makers, anything like that? So we've got a few more of those. And then who's there for kind of general DIY at home tips? Again, so right, that's covered the room now, so that's great. So, brilliant, excellent. So we'll move on to that. So that's later on. I'm going to throw the remote into questions, and we'll start getting some more almost one-on-one questions going. But in the meantime, I'm going to start. Have a couple of things running at once. So we can start cut some colours and some finishes on this completely bare piece of timber that's been sanded up to 180 grit, as I mentioned earlier. And I've got this antique panel here, which is in a pretty bad state. I'm going to start cleaning that. And I'm going to use some other products in it as well, which again are all sold here. So anyone who's got furniture at home that is a bit lackluster and needs a bit of a lift, I'm going to demonstrate what these finishes do. And I'll probably split into quadrants and work each piece a little bit further. So this is what something plus wax can do. This is what polish and wax can do. And then we'll see if we get on it. Some of these are a little bit smelly. They're not dangerous. Nothing I use is banned or dangerous. Some of the stuff I use is what I wouldn't bring it here. I'd be aware of leaving that approach to yourself. If anyone finds that it's a bit too smelly, just tell me and I'll stop using it. Some of these are slightly, they're quite spirited. Although, like I said, most of these are made from household. This is made from household items, but it has got a smell to it. If anyone finds it too overpowering, tell me and I'll stop and I'll put that away. But I need to say that because some people just find it too overpowering. It's only a small amount. So this is a cleaner. This is my own cleaner that I make. This is what I would call an anti-cleaner and reviver. Cleans and revives finishes. But there's a product on the market which can be bought which is similar-ish, and it's by Liberon, which there's a stain there, but that's Liberon, so people might be familiar with that brand and the logo. And they do it used to be called Libnats, which was nice and easy to remember, but now I think it is just called wax and polish remover, which is a bit ambiguous because it doesn't remove polish, it will remove wax. It's a de-waxer like this. But you don't want it to really remove all the polish. You want it to just remove the grime, and it does. It just leaves the polish on there. But that's what it's for. So anyone that needs to go out and buy a kind of clean and revive the furniture at home, Liberon, they're the only company I know of that make a product like that. I don't think Fiddes do one. I don't think Mylands do one, to my knowledge. But as I say, I make my own. This is an 18th century recipe from a book I've got. I've tweaked it a little bit to kind of use the materials that we can get today. Some of these materials probably are banned as the 18th century one. But I'm going to pop the lid on.
Is that a veneer?
No, this is solid. This is solid mahogany. It's French polished, but it's probably been had a go at some point in its history. I wouldn't be surprised if it's at some point had a more modern lacquer on it, because in fact, let me lift that up and we'll see. Now I've started cleaning it. I don't want to see those yellowy patches on there. That happens when usually moisture gets onto the surface and it breaks its way through the surface, through the finish, and it gets trapped and it can't come back out, and it creates these sort of bubbles. That doesn't happen as much in French polish as it does with more modern, and by modern I mean anything from 1900 onwards really in terms of that. So that's when they started using more oil-based varnishes. So I think it might have had that at some point, but there's not a lot on there. So this is going to make quite a bit of difference. So I'm just going to clean this up, and then I'll hold it up for you again, and you can see that what effect it has. And I'm going to do another quarter of it with a product called Vitashine, which is by Fiddes, which again is sold here. I think.
Yeah, I've got a couple of tons of it. Yeah. So you'll have to be quick.
Yeah. No fighting.
Well, I don't know. We are live streaming, but it's not pay per view. So
Yeah, that's right. Next time. So as you can see, I like to work in a circular motion when it comes to cleaning, even waxing, things like that. You'll have heard, working with the grain. Quite a lot of times it is best to work with the grain, especially when it comes to things like hard wax soil. But quite often when it comes to getting it on and getting as much coverage and getting it pushed into the grain, I like to work across the grain because that's the best way of getting into those open slashes of grain. You work with it, it kind of just washes over the top. If you work against it, the grain scoops it up, and that's the same with a lot of different finishes. And you'll see that as well when I'll be doing some French polishing as the evening wears on. I'm just going to wipe that up. That's enough of that. I won't be. If anyone did find that a bit smelly, I won't be using it again. But it is the strongest smell that's in that is just the acetic acid, which is household vinegar. That's that's laboratory strength, but it's still. I wouldn't put it on chips, but it isn't going to. It's not going to melt the face off. So that's cleaned. This isn't going to do anything about those yellowy marks there where the moisture's got onto it. If a piece of furniture came in with that amount of damage, and it's down to the customer in a way, they might just say, no, I just want it revived and I'd clean it and wax it. If someone did want all of that gone, then you'd have to go to methylated spirits and strip it really. But bear in mind, French polish is methylated spirits based. I mix it like 2/3 French polish to 1/3 mess, just to get it workable. when you clean, when you have to take all that off, if you have to as a restoration job, you're not taking everything out of it there. All those hundreds, thousands of coats that someone's put on, they'll still be in there. You kind of just creating a slurry and almost re-amalgamating it, and then just going over the top again. So you're not wasting anything really.
It's very polished shellac.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So shellac is a secretion from a beetle. The lac beetle is called. They come from South America, and also, I mean, that sort of originated in Egypt, really. So that's sort of North African part of the continent. It's been around, as far as I'm aware, 2,000 years BC-ish. It started to be discovered and used. Same as gilding. Gilding has been around for I don't know how they pressed gold as flat as they did with the technology they had or didn't have. Quite incredible. But that's how long it's been around. So we didn't start really using it until the mid 1700s. So it kind of came to us a little bit later. But we were still using the waxes and the oils that they were using back then. Right. So this is the Vita Shine that I mentioned earlier. It's the wood equivalent of brasso, really. It's got a mild abrasive powder in it. I guess it's got something like pumice powder or something like that, rotten stone maybe. I've never really looked into the ingredients, but it's a paste. It's quite thick. If I go like that, it's not going to come out. It's quite a thick paste. It's a bit smelly, but it's designed for the household user, so it's not something that's going to be too noxious. I would use a cloth with that. I wouldn't go, or the most I would go with is probably steel wool. So I'm going to use that because that's a bit messed about that. We've got some steel. I thought I did. I didn't. It looks like I've left the steel. But anyway, okay. Well, now just use this pad, which is about the equivalent of 4-0 steel, well, or 3 pound, what I said. I'm just going to do a quarter of this. And I'll also do a little bit more that I've cleaned, and you can just see the difference. Because really, this is absolutely filthy, so it should be cleaned really. But again, just working around in small circles, just at a nice, comfortable pace. This is the pace. I might work a little bit quicker than this in the workshop, just because obviously it's a commercial environment. We're trying to sort of stick to a budget usually in a time frame. But this kind of work, half the pleasure of it is that should be quite meditative, really. It's not supposed to be done in a flat out way. A question I've been asked on a number of occasions when I've done these talks is, with French polishing, can it be mechanised? Can I spray it? Can I do this? Can I do that? You might be able to. I've never tried to spray it. It might be sprayable. As for mechanised, yeah, I guess people are talking about maybe those buffing things, but mechanical buffing machine. For me, that takes away the whole point of French polishing. It isn't just about what you can achieve on the timber. It's about what it does for you. It's a really lovely way to pass the time. I've been doing it 30 years. I'll be hopefully doing it for 30 plus more, fingers crossed. And it's just one of those things where I can switch off. Once you've found your rhythm with it, once you've found that relationship with the timber, how hard to press against it, every piece of timber is different. Every job is different. People say, oh, how many coats do we have to do? It's sometimes more, sometimes less. It's one of those things that it's just purely instinctive. And almost all of the pleasure for me is that I just get into that zone where I just completely switch off. I've got a little bit of music playing on the radio, and it's a really nice way to pass the day. I start at 8:30 in the morning, and then it's lunchtime or even later before I even know about it. It's a really great way to pass the time. I did a class, an all-day class last Wednesday here in one of the classrooms. And most people, it was only a class of 8, and almost everyone there said they wanted to learn French polishing. So again, I tried to cover as much as possible of other things for anyone that needed to know it. But we just spent all day French polishing. So every single person, a piece of timber. I demonstrated, I explained, I got them to make up their own rubber, which they could keep. And we just spent the day polishing, and then I drop onto something else while we wait for that to go off a bit between coats. And it was a really nice way, everyone seemed to really enjoy it. There was one person that said, oh, I don't think I've got the patience for this. And I said, well, then it isn't for you. But there's plenty of finishers out there. They came to learn to finish, so we worked with hard wax, or we worked with a few of the other things. And it isn't for everyone, but actually they still did it, and actually, weirdly, they produced the best result of the day. And everyone did really well. I'll say that much, but no one had ever touched French polish before. So I was expecting to see at least one or two really quite shocking results, but everyone did pretty well. You could see quality differences, but the person that said they didn't think they had the patience produced quite an incredible result. And they seem to enjoy it. So maybe they'll change their mind. Maybe they change their own mind just by doing better than they thought. Sometimes it is a confidence issue, and people think, "Oh, I'm not be able to do it," but it's weird. No, so a bit like in wax, this stuff is something that you put on and work in, and then you buff it, but it isn't something that's designed. I would always wax on top of this. I would always add something more nourishing because this has got, as I said, it's got abrasives and it's quite a sort of a solvent-based product. So on its own, I think it's just a little bit lacking. Just a wax on the top. So I'm going to lift that up again. I hope I catch it in the light. But can you see the result that's had on the piece compared with just a clean there? And obviously that last corner hasn't had anything done to it at all. So for something that was in quite a poor condition, that's, some people might be pleased just with that and think, wow, if my piece of furniture looked like this, and that's what I've ended up with, that's probably enough. I'm going to French polish this bit now, and then, in fact, I might do this whole section, and then I'm just going to wax this on its own. So again, it's completely fine if you've got an antique that's looking really dingy and dirty to use steel wool or one of these pads and just go for the tinner wax. So I'm using fiddes waxes. You need to go behind the counter and get those for a minute. They're on sale here. I've been using those. I've been using fiddes wax longer than I've been coming to Yandles. So then it's not something that I'm not affiliated to fiddes in any way. But when I started my career back in '95, I was using dry wax. I was using Liberon. I was using fiddes. And fiddes just kind of it became my finish. And I said, "Your price of this fixed." I use all those others too. They've got different purposes for me. Some are better at cleaning. Dry wax is slightly more liquid. Even though it's a solid thing, it's just got more solvent in it, and it is really good for cleaning on first. But fiddes has just got that right balance. It's very thick wax, and I just get on with it really well. So, with no affiliation whatsoever, I just really highly recommend it. So I'm going to start French polishing now. So what I've got on here is white polish, as it's called. It's a normal shellac-based French polish. It's got a tiny amount of white pigment in it. And the reason for that usually is to stop it looking yellow when it goes on. Some polishes, if you polish, a timber like this is quite light anyway, but if I spent all day French polishing that with a traditional French polish, it would end up quite orangey. And with antiques, it kind of doesn't matter too much. But if you want to French polish something that you've just made in a lighter timber, then white polish is the one to go for because it's got that. It's just there to, anti-yellowing properties to it. So as I start, again, I'm working in circles at the moment. And that's probably the first thing I would go for. If you're starting to body up a piece of timber, and this is especially pertinent if it's a brand new piece of timber, not one that's already got polish on it. To be honest, if this was an antique that came in for restoration and it already had this on it, I would just be working with the grain. You wouldn't see where I'd been. I wouldn't be leaving on the streets, but for purposes of demonstration, I'm going to be turning almost like this a brand new piece of timber.
What actually is that?
This is so. I'll unwrap it and show you. This is a French polishing rubber. This one a while, but this isn't one of my oldest ones. Some of them are really, really years and years old. They do last. This is cotton wadding, which is sometimes called silver skin. It's sometimes called swan skin wadding. It's got a very fine skin over it. It's actually used in upholstery. When it starts out, it's quite thick. It's just cotton wool basically, but it's got this skin over it to hold it together when it's under the sea. This is what we use in French polishing. So I cut a square. This is a reasonably small one, but usually about a foot or 30 centimeters, maybe slightly smaller. When I start off with that square, I just fold it in half, and I've got the crease facing upwards. From there, I make a triangle. So I just take those top corners and I fold that down. So now I've got a triangle. And then I take the end corners and I fold them up to meet the top. So now I've got a kind of diamond shape. So to just do that again, it's folded in half, and then it's made into a triangle. And then I flip those up and I make it into this diamond shape. And that just fits really nicely on the hand. And this, the best thing for me, all these years later, I've never found anything better. This is an old bed sheet, an old pillowcase, anything like that, anything cotton, light cotton, that has been washed lots and lots of times. So I get a lot of charity shops that I know, they know what I do, and they ring me up and they say, we can give them a bit of bedding, it's no good to sell, come and get it. And I just get given it bags and bags of it. Far too much for me to use, really. But it's brilliant. You want it almost so it's falling apart. It just tears. It's almost like tissue paper. But it's lint free. The reason that's so good is because all the lint has been washed out of it. So, sorry, I might have rushed into that. So I've put my wadding into it so the point is facing upwards. I drop that point down and I wrap those edges round until I've got a tail there, and then that tail just wraps over the top and becomes a kind of a handle, really. I always just start off rubbing it on my hand, back of the glove, just to make sure it's still damp enough to use. If it starts to go too sticky, I'll reach for the mess and I'll just apply it to the surface. But I'm going to go right across the grain now. So in terms of finishing, that usually goes literally against the grain. It goes against everything you've been taught about not going across the grain, but that is the fastest way to get that into those open pores, which I explained earlier. Then I go diagonally in one direction, and then I go diagonally in the other. So I'm effectively producing a cross shape, an X shape on the surface of that. And I'll probably go back to circles again. And I've heard polishers talking about figures of 8 and capital P's and little O's and all this stuff. And this is kind of a little O, really. I do sometimes do a figure of 8. It just feels a little bit more awkward to me, and it's not really achieving anything more. But again, if you're going to practice this, try everything. Try all the different things. You'll read books. You might see YouTube demonstrations these days. They're all valid. So try everything. Just find your fit. But for me, I go circles, I go across, diagonally one way, diagonally the other way, and I go back to circles, and then finally, I'll finish with the grain. Now, the most important thing with French polishing, I mean this, the most important thing is that this rubber, as I call it, must never be stopped. Don't put it on and then begin. If I put that on there and hold it there, it burns straight through everything you've done. But you might be 900 pokes into a piece of timber, and you'll burn all the way through it, and you'll never get rid of that patch. You're going to have to rub it right back, and it's kind of the nightmare of French polishing. But from the very beginning, I'm going to exaggerate this now, and I have been doing it, but not exaggerated. I'm going to start over here. So by the time I hit the timber, I'm already running. And by the time I sweep off, I finish over there again. So there's no point at which I put it on and then start. And that way, you can just keep polishing. So I'm always moving with the grain against diagonal. It doesn't matter. Obviously, my movements now are less exaggerated, so it probably doesn't look as obvious, but there is no point at which that rubber touches and stays there, because it split second is enough. Even in the class on Wednesday, there was a guy who was doing really, really well. We were bodying up, which is getting to that level where you really are starting to fill that grain up. That's the expression that we use. And then we start spiriting off. So that's where I put a bit more methylated spirits into my bits. And you can see it as you work. You can see it actually rising off as you go. And that's kind of flattening out any marks that you have left. You don't want to try not to leave marks. But again, I'm going to lift that up just so people can see. Starting to develop a sheen, but you can see where I've been. You can see that you can see those circles, figures of 8, diagonal lines. Sorry, over there. You can see where I've been on it. And that's okay. This would be the earliest stage of French polishing. So, despite the fact that you're still sticking to all the rules about, not burning through and not putting too much on, you can see that and squeeze that, nothing's going to come out of it. You don't soak this thing, you don't absolutely fill it up. this stuff isn't cheap anymore. It's a lot cheaper when I started, relatively as well. So cost of living, but it's shot up in price. So I use these type that. This is a branded wash and out cleaner bottle. They're great. They last ages, and then they're really good for kind of mixing up your polish. And you can kind of see. I normally go to about that line there, and then fill up the mass, and well, I can adjust it up and down as I see fit. So again, I go back to the glove then, and you can see as I do that, that's nice and wet now, but it's not so wet. I can again hold that out. Nothing's going to be squeezed out. Go back in across the grain. And it should feel smooth as well. There was again a guy at the class, he just kept getting stuck to the piece of timber. Now I gave him a bit of a trial by fire really, because there's only so much you can fit in as a class of 8. The bench was, it's a small bench, so 2 people to a bench. So they only had a small piece of timber, but done correctly, you can work that all day and not get the issues. But he was just putting slightly too much polish in his rubber, and he was working really quickly. And he achieved a really good sheen quite quickly, but he started dragging it. You get this judder, and you start rolling the rubber over. And here, where the surface that touches the timber stays pretty smooth, and you can see kind of how light it is. If I roll it over, you can see it's getting a bit more yellow there. That's just because the polish kind of gets forced upwards, and that does become quite sticky. But it's great in the hand, it doesn't drop it. But it should always feel really smooth. And this is about the size of the piece the students are working on. It's a really small piece to demonstrate. And usually you'd be working on, let's say it was a chest of drawers, doing one side, then the other side. You might then go onto your drawer fronts, the frame of the chest, and then the top. By the time you go back, you've covered quite a square metre each. So really, with French polish, you do want, if possible, a larger surface to work on. I did get a box delivered to me the other day, beautiful piece of cabinet work. It was going up to Claridge's today. It was a test piece where it was going to be filled with sweets and all sorts of posh stuff. And it was a gorgeous box, but I got delivered it, and I was told I got delivered it just after lunch on Thursday, about 1:30. And I said, when do you need it back? Like, thinking they'd say, this time next week. Oh, there's a carrier coming at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thanks very much then. Brand spanking new piece of unfinished timber work, which I had to fully French polish by the evening, really. But I got it done, but it's a push. And it looked fine, but it didn't look as good as it could have done had I had longer to do it. So, but they got their money's worth.
So the solution you're putting on rubber is a mix of white polish and so
That's white polish, yeah. So that is a shellac-based polish, and it's about 2/3 polish to 1/3 methylated spirits. And being white polishing, but you just kind of see it's got a greyish, almost lilac-y tinge, and that's just simply the mess. Mess is purple as a bottle. It's got dye in it to stop you distinguishing. Apparently that is the actual reason. It's,
to do all of that in one.
Yeah, great question. So exactly that. If I was doing something the size of this, for example, again, I'd start over in one corner and I'd work all the way across and off, and then I'd start again, maybe across the grain, all the way across and off. But it's very rare that I would concentrate on one small area. Maybe on a restoration of a piece. Let's say someone had, I don't know, put a hot cup on there and produced a ring. There's a million different tricks I would try before I went for French polish for that small area, because it's just notoriously difficult to blend. I might put a few coats on at the end, but really you want to try and work the whole surface. There's so many different things you can do. If you do get an accident like a scratch or a ring mark or a burn, there are many more tricks up the restore sleeve than just going straight to the French polish. That would probably be the hardest part. But yeah, absolutely great question. I would work the whole surface. And if you've got, that's why it's so much easier. I do a lot of grand pianos, for example. If they just need a quick titivate, I'll do the whole thing on site. There's no reason to love that about hire 6 guys to move it. Do it on site. But if I do need to take it away, I had a fire damaged one. It wasn't hit by the flames, but the room was hot and it all just turned into it just pickled out. So I took it apart. You can take off all the lids, you can take off everything really, and leave the frame there. And that's what I did. So everything, all the components came back And it's just great. You know, you set everything up and you work across one piece and then straight onto the next one. And with something that size, by the time you get back to the first piece, it's more than dry enough. But as you can see, with this tiny little bit, this is still feeling nice and smooth.
But how would you reach the far side? It's a big piece.
You just have to. I mean, it is difficult. You do find yourself reaching over quite a lot. If you've got, try not to. But if it's something really big, then you'd have to make it central into a room, put it on some trestles, and you might have to break it into two halves. And again, it's a great point. You'd have to just walk around the other side, or if you've got a bench up against the wall, you might have to just manhandle it and turn it around each time so that you can do each half. You will notice when you do that, your halves, you will start to notice those as they build up. That then comes down to that cutback that I told you about with the 320 or maybe 400 bit, where you will be able to cut through those lines and start again. And then you might concentrate on just working across the grain so you don't get that. But it's one of those things where you do get challenging jobs. I haven't had many that are like that. Even huge dining tables tend to be made up of leaves that when you take them off, they're generally no more than 2.5 feet in width, so you can work each one. But occasionally, if you do get the worst ones are circular tables for me. Great big, I did a 2 metre one, which doesn't sound that big, but that'll seat 12, 14, 16 people. It's really quite big. But even 2 meters, you could just, I'm only 5'7", but you can just about reach into the middle. And I work radially then, I work outwards in a kind of, from the centre outwards. Or, like a fan, all the way around. And you just keep going. You can still do your circles, you can still kind of treat it in quadrants, like a pie chart, like a pie. And you can just treat, exactly, that's brilliant. You can just treat each piece almost as a separate entity. By the time you finish, you'll blend it all together. These things are probably a bit more advanced, but again, if you had to go yourselves, practice. The man that taught me all those years ago told me that French polishing takes 5 minutes to learn and a lifetime to master. That couldn't be more true. And I'd say that with any of these finishes. And I'm going to leave that for the time being. That's just got bodied up. It's not, I wouldn't be able to present that as a finished job because it's still got all those marks over it. But I'm going to leave that. And by the end of today or this evening, I'm going to do a little bit of a rub back on it and wax it. And I'm also going to wax this and just see, hopefully, that, there will be a difference. I want that. I want there to be a difference. I want people to see what each finish can achieve.
So you put it jammed up, keep it.
Yeah, exactly. Just keep it there. That can be in there for months. As long as it's a good jar with a good seal on it, that'd be fine. Some people use those Ziploc bag things. I just like all the jars and all lined up on a shelf and easy to get to. Most of them are labelled. That way, I know what they're at. And it's the same as stains. Everything's got a place and everything just lined up.
Would you ever use a bigger,
Yeah, not much bigger though. Not much bigger. That one is on the smaller side. I can't remember what I made. I made that for a specific purpose. I've made some that are tiny, not much. I mean, twice the size of a thumb maybe, for getting into small carved areas. But a normal size one would be 10, 15% bigger than that. But certainly you don't want it so big that you can't handle it. And touching upon what I said earlier about the fact that it's just a process, you have to get used to it taking a long time. It's not going to get you any further to cover a bigger area because you're still working in those small circles and diagonal lines. Even when you go all the way across, anything that's too big to grip onto, you're probably end up dropping. So that's not my biggest, but it's not that much smaller than the biggest ones. But and again, everyone will have a preference. You're going to have bigger hands than me, so you might find a bigger one works. But probably, you're probably fine. But even, it's on the smaller side. It's just a bit easier to kind of handle, really. So I'll start talking about other finishes now. I've mentioned hard wax oil quite a few times. That's something that I started using in the late 90s. I think it was Osmo back then. They invented it. They're a Danish company that came up with it. It came over here and everyone started using it straight away. It was just a brilliant finish. There are things that come and things that go. There's always going to be a new miracle. It's the same with that expanding foam glue. Everyone was using it. I think it's horrible. It's horrible to use. It doesn't last very long now. You know now that after 10 years it turned to dust, more or less. Same with Cascamite back in the 70s, 60s. This turns back to dust. So we have to kind of have these things on the market to know what they're going to do. But Osmo and now fiddes and Liberon, they all do a hard like soil. They're really good finishes. I can't be praiseworthy enough, really. They're natural. They're made of vegetable oils and the waxes that are in there. Carnauba wax is one of the bigger wax ingredients. That's a vegetable-based wax as well. So that's kind of what sets it hard. Just really good products. They take a little bit of getting used to. I like to put them on with a cloth, but if you, and I use these. This is called stocking out or something. Call it mutton cloth. I buy it in a big roll. I ran out on Wednesday and I haven't got any more, so I kind of bought dregs with me tonight. Usually it comes on a large roll and it lasts me quite a while. But I do like to use them to put it on with. You might get a little bit of fluff in the finish, but once I put the finish on, I leave it for 10 or 15 minutes and I take most of it back off again. Again, it goes back to fewer, sort of more coats with a lighter amount than one big thick coat. And it works for me. I do I've mentioned this earlier, I do use these brushes as well. It just depends what surface I'm using, really. It depends on the timber. Some timbers work better with a brush, some work better with a cloth. I don't, it's just down to the density, the grain structure, all of those things. So again, a lot of questions people have, the answer is see what works best. It really is. See how you work best. What you do might be different to someone else with an equal result. And the timber, even the environmental conditions, whether it's a hot or humid day, that really affects finishes, especially waxing. Those hot days we had going back a lot. Even though I've got quite a well insulated workshop, it stayed quite cool, but my waxes were going really liquid and thin. So I just left it. I didn't bother. I left. If I had a job that I had to wax, I'd leave it to the evening. I wouldn't even bother trying to use it today because you just fight against yourself. So there are so many factors with it in finishing, but it's down to the individual user to find out what works best, and it becomes instinctive. You'll know you're too hot for finishing today, so maybe I'll have a day off, day of feature or drinking. But if you have to work, you might do sanding or preparation and say relieve the finishing because it just doesn't work too well on a hot day. And so it becomes instinctive, really. As I say, I was going to do some hard black soil. Again, I'm not sure how much point there is because it's not going to be dry by the time I leave for it tonight. It's not something I can pass around. It's just going to go all over you. So I think I'll pass around some more samples that are finished and tell you all about what's on them because I've got multiple different finishes on those. I can't remember what I passed around already. Was it
This one.
what was that? Oh, you got it over there. Brilliant. Oh, that's okay. So I'll pass these around. These are all. These have been done with this Rubio Monocoat. This is a really new finish to me. I think it's a new finish in general. I don't know how long it's been out. I think somewhat.
Hang on, from America, isn't it? There's
Belgium.
lots of YouTube with it.
Yeah, I think they might use it. It's a German company, from what I understand. It's made in Germany, but it could well be really, it might be one of those things or maybe it's invented in the States and they just do it manufactured. I don't know, but I know that it's German on the label. I mean, after I can't really read, it's too small, but I looked it up as much as I could, and it seems to be certainly manufactured in Germany. As I mentioned earlier, it does have a really long dry time. So commercially, for me, it would be very difficult for me to use. If I was making a piece of furniture or something, I have the time, no problem at all. If I'm doing the floor finish, as an example, I'm working in Scotland in October. I've got work in Reading. I was working in North Yorkshire a couple of years ago. I really do work all over the place. I need to see that completely finished before I can sign it off. I wouldn't just say, yeah, trust me, it's going to look great. There's an invoice. It's going to do it. So I need to see it. So leaving, Osmo and fiddes hard wax all are bad enough, and they've got an 8-hour dry time. But I do go back, cut it back, rub it back or whatever, and then wax it. Most of my finishes are finished with a wax on top. Almost all of them, without exception. That's what the end user then can maintain. If it's a big enough customer, usually a floor or something, it's big enough paid job that I'll give them fruit and a wax at the end and a little demonstration and I'll say, right, this is what you do now, or whoever, you know, you could get me back into it. I don't mind, but that'd be then a yearly or 2 yearly maintenance. But yeah, so these are brilliant. I can't recommend them highly enough, but it's a long dry time, so it's something people need to be prepared for and say, okay, well, I need to factor that into the job. If you've got a craft fair on that, don't do it the night before because you just won't be able to take enough to sell. It's just something to think about. It's easy to forget as well because it goes on so easily. But I'll pass those around. I'll pass that. This is all the same finish, it's just different colours. I'll pass those that way. Again, have a little feel. It's one coat, this stuff. So again, that's what's so impressive about it. I was impressed by how much coverage you get on the timber. You can still see the grain, but it's a really deep colour. And for one coat, I was impressed. But as I say, the dry time is it's just something that you've got to factor into a job every time.
Instead of by brush.
Yeah, I actually used one of these for that because that's what they gave away with the sample kit. I was given the sample and had one of those abrasive pads, so I thought, okay, that's obviously what they wanted to use, and I used it. You could use a cloth, you could use a brush, you could use a pad, and it's the same with hard wax oil. Really, this is oil based. This is probably more natural. It's got a lot of dye in it or pigment, but it is based on an oil. Hence why it takes so long to dry. Usually with oils, linseed oil, Danish oil, all that tongue oil, all the oils you've heard of before, they never truly dry. They're not ones that set hard like a varnish, but they go off enough. They go off sufficiently that you can buff them, and then it's water repellent, and then you get it on your garden furniture outside. As soon as the rain hits it, it beads up, it rolls off beautifully. But they don't set, even though they feel, if you put them on correctly, I might go into that in a minute actually, because I've got a method that I'll use. Not everyone might know about it, but it's really beneficial. But they stay they're what I call a soft finish. Wax is what I call a soft finish. And then varnish is the hard wax oils. They're a hard finish. So set French polish, even though softer than it's something that it's slightly more easy to damage. It's a hard finish. By that, the spirits evaporate and it's set hard. It won't move after that. Whereas wax, for example, a tin of wax, you pop it on, you buff it off, and it looks absolutely perfect. You can, if it's done properly, you could, a dining table. I call it the white shirt test. I get one of these class, rub it pretty vigorously. I don't want any wax on the end of that. So if I have friends coming in with white shirts on and they've all got their elbows on the table, maybe they shouldn't have their elbows on the table, but if they do, I don't want anyone going away and giving me a dry cleaning bill. So that's the test. But let's say again, hot day like we had back those few weeks, that wax is going to start to liquefy, even if you put it on really thin, as I say, more thin coats than one big thick coat. It will start to liquefy, and that's when you'll start noticing, blimey, my furniture starts to really mark. And that's just because the wax is softened, and there's nothing you can do about that. It's something we live with, something you just have to accept. But that shouldn't happen with French polish or setting varnishes, polyurethanes or acrylics, any of those things. So there's benefit and drawback to all finishes, really.
So how slow does that activator work? So cut down the days?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. It's 21 days without the activator. This is what they say on Rubio's website. 21 days without, 7 days with. So it chops it down. I found it was quicker than that, though. Those samples there, all those 4 samples, obviously 3 pieces of timber, but there's 2 different colours on there. They were done without any accelerator at all. And I hadn't read up on it really with that much, and I was just using it, seeing how I felt about it. I kept going back each day. It certainly didn't take 21 days. It probably took just over a week to 10 days, I would think. So half of what they said, which is good. The 7-day one, this is with the accelerator in it. I just experimented with the colours. That's a metallic blue. It's one of these. That's midnight indigo on there, and then that is silver grey, which is one of the standard colours. I mixed that with the accelerant, and I would say that went off in about 3 to 4 days rather than the 7. So, but nevertheless, anytime you're planning a job, I would always go by what they say, because there are times when it might happen. It might have just been that it was warmer.
Might be the surface that feels dry, but it would actually.
It could well be, yes. So maybe maybe it hasn't got the level of protection that it will have after that. That's probably the difference between dry and cured. Where something feels dry, but as you say, it's not fully cured. So I would I would base everything on what they say. They'd obviously experiment with enough in labs and in the factory, but it certainly felt like it had gone off. I'll give it the thumbprint test, the bare thumb, same with French polish. I want to know whether that's ready to wax or not. I take a glove off, my thumb on for about 10, 15 seconds. If I've got a fingerprint on there, thumbprint on there, then it's not quite ready. And it might feel, this feels pretty dry to the touch. It's not sticky. If I put my thumb on there, if it leaves even the slightest print, I'll just leave it a little bit longer. And with French polish, people might have heard traditionally that polishers used to leave things for about 3 months before they delivered it back to a customer, or if it was a bespoke piece, they wouldn't deliver it until it was 3 months. Polishers these days, I think they've just changed them slightly. They're still as traditional as they were. They've probably just discovered how to kind of mitigate against that slightly, because I certainly would. Well, my workshop's not big enough to hang on to things for 3 months. They need to be in and out, although, overnight for me is sufficient. But certainly the polishers of today, I've never known anything that takes anything like that to go off. And usually you can work on them and wax them after I leave it overnight after my last coat of French polish. Those Osmos, or keep saying Osmo because I'm kind of used to them, but the fiddes, the hard wax oils, I found that the first coat takes doubly as long as the second and third. And it doesn't mention that, it just says allow 6 to 8 hours between colours. I've known the first coat to take way longer than that, 12 hours, 14 hours later. I was thinking, holy heck, come on. And the second coat goes off in no time at all, usually two hours and it's gone. And I think that's because you've got things in the timber, you might have tannin, like oaks and walnuts, for example, are very tannic, very high in tannin, so that's reacting, that's doing something. Also, the coat is soaking in. For me, I think it's mobile. While it's soaking in, it's moving. It's like a river, not being able to freeze, whereas still water can freeze. I think that's going on a little bit. And then by the time you get to the second coat, it's not actually reacting against anything that's in the timber, and it's also not as mobile. So that's my theory. But again, if you're ever planning a job that needs multiple coats, you'll get used to this, and you'll be able to say, right, well, in that case, I'll get the first coat on first thing in the morning. I might get a second coat on last thing at night, and then it's ready to go by the next day. So planning in finishing is quite important.
Which percentage rating to activate it to?
It says, I always usually think when they come out in bottles like this, it's usually balanced out, but it isn't in this case. It says 3 to 1. 3 activator to 1 part dye or oil, and that's a 20 and that's 100. So it doesn't quite work out, but that's what they say, and it did work.
I think the 20 ml ones reporting more samples.
Is that just a sample? But that's in the sell.
Yeah.
Yes, that makes sense. And so maybe when you
We mainly sell the larger ones then.
right. Okay. But I haven't used this enough really. I am going to experiment with it more because I did enjoy it. I love the range of colours, and I'm just going to see. I don't think having more activating will work. It might actually work against you, and you might end up with it cracking or anything like that. So it's usually best to kind of go with it. But I think anyone that gets a bit more experienced and confident with finishing, you can play with that. You can certainly get away with experimenting a little bit more. So I showed earlier this. I did this the other day at the class. This was a fair piece of both sides, and I started to stain that a little bit. I didn't seal it with anything. If this was a job, I probably would seal with a hard finish before putting the liner wax on. Reason being, that's a water-based stain with that's pretty robust. Don't get me wrong, I can pour some of that water on the line, I'm confident it's not going to all run off. But theoretically, if you did get it wet, if it was a floor and you came out and you got wet feet from the shower or whatever, there's a good chance you're going to go through and start taking some of that water-based stain out and start looking running. So generally speaking, I would finish that first with something, a hard wax oil, a sanding sealer, it doesn't really matter, just something solid. But not put quite enough on there that it isn't going to be able to be, the grain can still be penetrated by the lining wax, because that's the enhancement. But there's a bit of stained timber there, so I'm going to get some different waxes on that. I've got some. This is Liberon. I used to sell that here. I'm not sure. Do you still
Yeah,
sell that here?
go back now.
Yeah,
Yeah, everyone.
it's a really good product. It's a restorer's case, really. This is the sort of thing you've got a proper gilt mirror or a picture frame, gesso, probably well lead. If it's just got a bit chipped off or the corners start to wear through, this stuff, it's real gold lead held in suspension in wax with turpentine. And it's really good stuff. But I started messing about with it just as a finish. But it looks really nice. So I used a bit of that. They put a fragrance in this. I don't know why. It's not unpleasant. I just don't know why you think let's say it contains some sort of fragrance. So
Maybe the natural floors will.
it might be. I mean, it's turpentine based. I love the smell of turpentine. So I don't know about everyone else. I absolutely love it. So yeah, this is got some sort of perfume and that's it. I'm just rubbing that on. I've been really generous with that. I've got quite a lot on the cloth and work that whole surface. And this is, it's not the most, as I say, when you can see by looking at that oak, it's not the most striking grain pattern. I mean, this piece of ash has got quite a nice, even though it's straight, it's got a lot of oaken grain, so it'll be a lot more receptive to this kind of finish. But nevertheless, when I lined it, it still came out really nicely. So work the whole surface. As you can see, I'm working as the timber demands, really. Sometimes I rub it quite hard in one direction. Mostly I'm looking in circular motion. When I get to these rough bits, I'll just make sure that it's going in. But just bits and tear out where it went with plane, that happens. That's something where the plane change. But choose the majority of the grain, but there's going to be a little bit. And then I'll finish off with the grain. This is one of those finishers where it captures quite easily. Normally wax the same, unfortunately not bad. This is one. I've got strands, honestly. All the line wax so far, I think it's be the best one. It's the heaviest. Fiddes oils with it as well. There's no indicator of work. Some of them have got less bigger. This is really heavy. That's I think that one was so we just put focus with not far. That's most common. It gets really good effect. And I'll demonstrate with this in a similar way that I did with the line. Once I'm finished, I'll show you. Just line it all over. We'll find the acts like an emulsion. Really does look almost like a paint there. So it's really opaque. The whole surface. This is something you'll find out if you decide to experiment at home. Blindness, it starts with the orientation. So just exactly something like fine wire. As it starts to rub off, I guess it's one of which that's what I say. It's not before it just pure old white, but it's no grain. How we use it in calibration. Build protection. But yeah, it goes in that fashion. One thing. It's enjoying themselves. Quite a lot of people like time combination. Like this it's not this soothing, it's my effect. It's oh god, it's a lot of white wood. The combine is very time for anything. It's not got this whole discussion. This is more of a quad. Principle of application is the same. So I'm just going to go back over this. It's been hard. So as you can see, that's how I leave that before it to let go on. It's not a great feeling. Yes, you can still see it, but how it's here. It's not proper, we'll just take up a little bit of the excess. And that's made us a small amount of difference, but it's still a really strong wash on there. It's still got quite a lot of surface residue on there. But I'm going to leave that just to harden off for 10 minutes. I'll do the same with that gilt on the other side, so I'll just leave that like that. And then we'll work with some other wax over the top of that, which will then mitigate against that very strong sort of overly emulsified presence. You know. I'm going to go back to this now for a little bit. That French polish will be more than tolerant to rub back a little bit. Just really gently. So now this rub back, I am just going to work with the grain. So when you're doing anything with an abrasive, if you go across the grain, if you do anything with those circles, you're going to see it. You're going to see scratches going across the grain, and they're very difficult to get rid of. So I'm working quite gently. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on this at all. Absolutely minimal pressure, but I'm doing it so that I can see, to show you that part before I go to the rest of it. I can see that it's taking the top surface off. It's, even if I rub that away, you can see a bit more gloss under there, but effectively, I'm actually doing something. I'm taking off a good few layers of polish, certainly not all of it. We do want to leave a very thin skin on the top, but with French polish, you've got, I'm going to just do it with my fingers. The surface of the timber goes into valleys like that. Those open valleys you want to fill up. And if you go coat after coat after coat and keep going without cutting back, you're going to end up with a massive thickness on the top of the surface, and that will start to dither. We call orange peel. It's a bit like anyone's ever sprayed a car or watched a car being sprayed. If you overspray it, it starts to dither. It's that finish is too thick, it just starts to soften. It's the same with this. So all you're trying to achieve is to fill that valley up, fill that open slash of grain, but you're still leaving absolutely micron thick surface on the very top of the timber. And that's the very essence of French polishing, really. French polishing, for me, I think, is the only finish that you're working on to completely fill that grain. And again, this is a great example. This section here, which I used Vita Shine on, I'll just move it around in the light. You can't see any open slashes of grain on that at all. It looks like a completely flat surface. It almost looks like glass. And mahogany is an open grain timber. It's certainly not as open as ash and oak, but it's not completely closed grain like something like beech is. And that's what those timbers that are really closed don't tend to be as attractive, because it was the grain pattern that gives us some of these lovely patterns. But that is a fully French polished piece, and even as I look at it in the light, I can't see any open slashes of grain in it at all. And that's just hundreds, as I say, hundreds, maybe thousands of plates. I just don't know how many someone's put on. But so just lifting this back a tiny little bit. So as you remember, that was Vita. This was cleaned. That was Vita Shine. That was cleaned and French polished, and this is still quite dirty. So now I've got to that level on there. I don't need to do anything to the Vita Shine bit. That does its own. It's abrasive, so it does its own pattern back. I'm just going to take some wax now. I've got this as Georgian mahogany. So another question someone asked me at the class the other day was, do you have to match the wax to the timber? You don't have to at all. But generally speaking, with antiques, you try to. So you would use a mahogany wax for a mahogany piece of furniture. You would use English oak wax for an oak piece of furniture. But that certainly isn't by any means a rule to stick to. You can use a really dark wax on a light timber just again for enhancement, and I'll do that on there. In fact, that's just a fairness dash. I'll stick a bit of wax on it. You can see how it's different today.
As you get your depth goes. Is that by doing the layers?
With wax.
Yeah.
With wax. Yeah, exactly. So wax is quite difficult. This is, in fact, that's a good question, and it's a perfect piece of timber to demonstrate on, really.
When you spread your car, you just add layers of lacquer.
You add lacquer on the top. So wax is a tricky one. If you're just using wax and nothing else, which you can do, wax is perfectly adequate. I used to do it on floors with a floor-specific wax, but it takes a long time. You can't just go coat after coat after coat on the same day, because it's got a certain amount of solvent in it. You're just going to be re-liquefying what you've already done and taking it back off again. So it takes time, and it usually takes sort of human touch as well. So a handrail is a perfect example of that. A handrail on a staircase. I don't know if anyone goes to National Trust or Popsicles or anything like that. I like going to those places. It's one of those things that I notice because it's what I do. But when you walk in and you see a handrail at those places, It's got a finish like you just cannot believe. As a French polisher, I would struggle to achieve the surface look of that handrail because that is just generations, decades, centuries even of burnishing with human hands. So the timber itself is starting to be burnished in a way that we just wouldn't have time to do in a commercial environment. And it's wax as well. Generally speaking, you go back to the Stuart period, late 1600s, and Tudor period, like Montacute, for example, that's Elizabethan. Any of those periods, it's just wax. There's nothing else on there. It shouldn't be French polished. It goes back before that. And that is build up and build up and build up. And that's a finish I could only dream of. But you can certainly have a go. But what you're looking at doing is putting a coat of wax on. So I'm going to do that now. Don't want too much. I'm going to use a cloth. You can use a brush. I've got brushes that I've had for well over 20 years, just normal paint brushes. Normally they're natural bristle ones as opposed to these plastic ones that I talked about Honda. They're a state, to be honest, but I love them. They're like an old friend. They're so coated with wax. You can kind of clean them up a bit, but I don't. And they just work really well. But put a coat of wax on something, leave it, buff it, and leave it again. And then before I put another coat on, I buff it till you think you just couldn't buff it anymore. In doing that, you are driving it. Again, it's about getting it into the grain rather than sitting on the surface. Because anything you put on that surface, and look at that, it really is. It's a good strong colour, that one. When I've buffed that back off again, it's made a huge difference. But it's very rare that I would just use wax on timber. If I wanted to achieve a really strong colour, then I would go for a stain first, almost always, because that's the best demo of that really, is that, that's covered in gold now, but you saw that when it was just stained, and the difference in that, and that was, there's another piece there. So that was a piece I made a while back. Same again, it's got planer marks on it that are filled up, but you can see the difference between stain and just a wax, and these are very similar bits of timber. You've got open ash. They're really quite similar. Ash is slightly whiter. Oak's got that very slightly yellow tint to it, but the stain achieves a huge amount more than wax on its own. Wax and stain is a really good thing. Put a little bit of wax over this now as well, so a bit of that whitish
So
area.
coloured wax is the lazy hands.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I do use clear wax on a lot of stuff, but when you're in antique restoration especially, then matching the wax to the timber is just all about enhancing it that little bit further, and it works. It's if you've got dents, scratches, you might have little light sections that have been affected by water. Then a good wax on its own is going to really help against those. It's going to get rid of it'll fill a scratch out at the start. So once that sets, you shouldn't really be able to see it, or a lot less than you did. And yeah, if you did have a very light ring mark, it's a huge amount of work that comes from people putting ring marks and things. I personally don't mind. My table at home, I don't use mats. I don't use anything like that. I just let it get annihilated. And once a year, I'll just give it a restoration. That's the way it is. I get to some people's houses and just, sorry, because don't put that there. And I say, well, I know I did restore it, but
No, you missed it.
I can't say.
Here's
Not allowed to advertise.
Here's my card.
But so I've waxed that now. And now I'm just going to go with the grain a little bit. This is slightly, a lot of what I'm doing today isn't exactly as I might do it, but I've got to try and show you something at the end. So if I leave that too long, it'll set as I've left it, and it won't look quite so good. But I won't give this the full buff yet. I do want that to harden off. We buff it too quickly, you're more or less just taking off to just put on. Do need it to set to a certain extent. And I'll go back over that as well. So I've left a little bit of French polish as it was. I've used it as a cleaner in this area. So effectively, that's if you just have a piece of furniture. So that's about as bad as it could get. I would hope no one's got furniture as bad as that, but I'm not judging. But I've used that as a cleaner. I've used Vitashine on there, and then I've waxed a bit of the Vitashine. I've also left a bit of it just as it was. So we'll see this. You know, we've got about 6 different examples on there of what the finish would be. And the same with this piece there. I can still go, that's still quite wet, but I've just finished off in the direction of the grain. If you did put it on, as I say, I always put it on circularly or across the grain just to fill it. If you did just leave it like that to harden and then buff it, you'd really struggle to get those marks out. You'd have to work so hard, it wouldn't be worth it. I'd probably just start again, actually. I'd probably just get some more wax, just put it on, and it will liquefy what you've done. But it's if you finish with the grain, it just helps when you buff it. You don't have to sort of go absolutely hell for leather to get rid of some of those marks. It's just a bit That's another Rubio one I bought along. They do a product called pre-aging, and I thought, well, okay, let's have a look at this. It works particularly well on things like oak, probably walnut as well, tannic timbers. So when you've got, I'm making a door. I've got 2 on the go. One's for my house, one's for a listed building, where the other door's just beyond repair. Over the years, oaks especially, teak, totally different timber to oak, but they silver up when they're outside. That you've seen them before.
Yeah.
That's oxidization. That is just the atmosphere. That's a combination of sun, rain, the UV. All those things have an effect. And when we do, generally speaking, when I do something in oak, usually it is oak if it's a door for a listed building. It's just a timber that we use quite a lot. That colour that's on there, that's just hundreds and hundreds of years, but I've got to try my best and achieve that colour. So I use chemicals rather than stains. I wouldn't reach for an off-the-shelf stain. I'd be using things like iron sulfite. I'd be using something that I can buy, but effectively a lot of people take steel wool and put it in vinegar, and that creates a solution that you then brush on. I find that a bit unpredictable. It can patch up really, really quickly, but I buy iron sulfite powder. You just mix it with water, and it's a lot more easy to use. It doesn't patch up as quickly. It's kind of a bit more uniform, and you can mix it. You can also decide on the strength of what you're using yourself. Like a litre of water will use 1 teaspoon, and you can adjust it. Whereas the steel will vinegar does the same thing, kind of at the mercy of.
If you've got to remix.
Yeah, if you have to reproduce it, yeah, that's why I've made that mistake myself. I've had to go back and do something again. I thought, I didn't write it down. I don't remember exactly what I did. And then, luckily you get through it sort of by eye usually. Anyway, so this pre-aging thing, I thought I'll have a go with that. Produced a result almost exactly like steel wool and vinegar would do. It looked the same as it went on, and it behaved the same. It doesn't smell like that. It doesn't smell really of anything. Even with my glasses on, I can probably read that. But I'm sure they're bigger bottles, or online. I've got more info. But it works really well. So I'm going to give that a go and buy some of that, and I'm going to use it on these doors. Because some of the other things that I do, even though I've just said they're easier and they're more predictable, this certainly seems just so easy to put on, and it's you get plenty of working time. That's what you want. You scale that up to a large door, even though it's in components of planks or it's got stiles and rails and all of that sort of stuff. It can still be really difficult if you're working
Is
against
that the same 9 time?
I mean, that went off. So this is more like a pre-oiling chemical. So that is just like a water-based thing. So you could use a heat gun on that. I've got a heat gun that I use to speed up the drying times. But that is just air dried, and then you put the finish inside. So I did use a Rubio finish over the top. I used silver grey, which is just, I thought, well, okay, this is what I'm trying to achieve, silver in the timber, so I used the silver grey on the top with the accelerant, and that's dry, as I say, in sort of like 3.5 days. But I'm going to give that a go. And so, again, that's one of those things. This is, not everyone's going to need that in their arsenal, but it's still really interesting to play with. If you are making stuff out of oak, some people, I fume things in ammonia, but again, it's not something I can recommend to everyone here. You need to know what you do. And even if you do, it is pretty dangerous. But anyway, pass that around. I think it's have a look at it. I think it's quite interesting. I will look up what is in that. I think I haven't done that yet. So shit like that. I'm going to go with another coat after your question about building it up. I am just going to put another coat on half of that and we'll just see if there is any noticeable difference. And there will be, but it's when you start getting into multiple coats that you won't notice any difference. Well, I don't know how we're doing for time, but if anyone's got any specific questions, then fire them at me. I'm quite happy to, answer questions on a one-to-one basis. Anyone got anything that they want to know, even about a specific project they come to talk about? Anyone's got anything going on, by all means.
Would your approach to the French project be the same as the approach to the veneered surface?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've got a bureau which I'm influencing the role.
Yeah.
How do you maintain pattern control for that?
Just by being kept, so you don't want to over restore it, is that what you're? Yeah. I mean, that's one of those things that again comes down to personal preference that I was talking about, where people might approach them in a different way. Patina is a personal thing, really, almost. Some dealers like things to be really clean. In France, if you've ever been to a French antiques place, they cabinet scrape everything quite regularly. They've got that lovely bull work and tortoise shells, and most of their stuff's veneered in those exotic timbers, rosewoods and kingwood and all of that stuff. It looks great, but they cabinet scrape it regularly, so they're effectively going back to a brand new surface. And to me, that's too much because it's the surface that is the antiquity. It's the story. It's that build-up of age that makes it an antique. However, that's their approach. So you just got to kind of use your judgment on that a little bit. Use a cleaner first. As I say, the Liberon Livnet or waxing polish remover is the first thing I would go for. First of all, I'd look at it in different lights. Does it need too much cleaning? If it doesn't need too much, then I might just go straight in with a wax over the top, which I've done there. And it's going to act as a bit of a cleaner. It's got solvent in it. And if you're using one of these razor pads, that was filled with wax now, but that's one of the grey ones. And that just lives in that tin. It lasts for ages. That might be my first port of call. See what that looks like. Because you can always take it back on. You can't, it's much more difficult to put finish back on. A customer of mine went to another shop and asked them, and they didn't even break it twice. It wasn't here. Guys, they're really good. They said, oh yeah, white spirit, use some white spirit. Well, that just completely stripped everything off with French polished a lot. And it takes ages for it to dry out, weeks and weeks and weeks. Yeah. I use it for cleaning brushes, of course I do, and I use it for thinning things that are white spirit based. But other than that, I wouldn't use it for any other purpose because it's too strong. It's petroleum based. And by the time all that had come on, and I got the piece to restore, I just said, well, look, we're starting from scratch. What's happened's happened, but I'll try my best to make it look like it used to, and I did. So just go with a softly approach. Start with the least abrasive things first, see how they work. If it needs a little bit more, then go to the next one and see how that works, and go from the easiest down. Don't start with the hardest thing and then go, oh no, I've gone too far. You can't put it on once it's come on.
In terms of replacing word that's been done, not suppressing anything, it's just a case of staining that to match.
Yeah, I mean, that's a massively technical thing to do. I could spend 2 hours just on that question quite easily. That just comes down to your confidence and your experience level, really. Some timbers lighter, so this is for everyone, the answer, and that's what I try and do anyway with any question. Some timbers lighten with age, and some darken. Most darken with age, but some lighten. Walnut and rosewood, for example, they completely change. They become more yellow, and walnut as well. They go much more yellow. Golden, less so. Yellow might not be such a sympathetic term, but they go more golden. They start really, really dark. So it depends on what timber you've got, which way you need to go. If it's a timber that darkens with age, you're into an easier job, because then you can just go for stains. That's what I would do. I would just be using stains. I don't know how many stains I've got at my disposal in the workshop. It probably goes into the hundreds, I would think, and then you can mix those together. It's infinite. But just start with a few, start with basics. Experiment first before you've committed to gluing it down onto the piece. Experiment. Find out what works best. Once it's dry and finished as well, because it might look completely different. It's just stained. And if it's, again, this applies to anyone who's doing any project. When it's got polish and wax on it, which will be usually the final stage, that's going to look completely different to when you just stained it. So you need to experiment with these things. You might make something really beautiful, stain it, and think it looks great. And you start polishing. I don't know, that's actually too red or too green. You cool or warm in terms of colour spectrum.
Just like putting water on a piece of wood.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the first thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It
just changes.
It just changes. So all the old makers just lick that drum and just rub it on. Then you know it looks like it's got a finish on it. And so yeah, you're just going to have to experiment with that. Really, it's a complicated thing. I don't want to worry you or anything, but my apprenticeship is 7 years in length. And at the end of that 7 years, I was just about competent enough to be trusted on a piece of furniture. So, it's not an easy thing to do. But if you're confident with woodwork, then do it. And just, like I say, experiment on the knockout and then work into the piece. But yeah, so good luck.
Do you do a YouTube channel yourself?
I don't know, it's just not something I've ever got right. I know how good they are, but no, I don't have the time. I am on Instagram, it's the only social media I do, and it's all right. It's okay. I have got work from it. I like the community better. I follow a lot of other restorers, a lot of American ones as well. We mentioned America. Oh right, yeah.
She's very.
There's a lot of excellent craftspeople out there, and they seem to be really keen on keeping those traditions alive. Obviously, America's got a really good cabinet making tradition of shakers. All of those early kind of settlers in New England, especially, made fantastic furniture, and now they're obviously restoring as well. And they do things the proper way, I think, the way I do. So we follow it. There's a lot of us that follow each other, and it's a really good environment. But no, I haven't done any videos, so it's just. No, it's not something I've ever felt the need to do. It is. Yeah. I thought I was going to get 1 million followers and start earning from it, but I just don't think I am. I do things properly. Those people are more social media stars than actual finishers and stuff, so I'll stick to what I do, I think.
I'll tell Ben that and preach it.
Yeah. Any other questions at all? Anything anyone wants to know? Go on, sorry. Yep.
I put a new going finish and I'm about to finish.
Yeah.
And I was going to use hard wax on it.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting I put something else on first to enhance the going wood? We just put the wax on.
Yeah, it just depends what you want it to look like, I guess. It's going to enhance the grain as soon as we mentioned earlier, just wetting it is going to bring everything out. So if you just want to go with a clear coat, it is going to enhance it.
Okay.
If you haven't got anything to experiment on, maybe the underside or maybe just a bit of the same. Yeah, okay. So just play about. That's what I always say, because again, with a big surface, not only is it expensive in terms of material, it just takes a huge amount of time. It takes a lot longer to get it back off than it did to put it on in the first place. So always experiment. But you can experiment with colour. Colour is going to enhance it slightly more. But if you want it to look natural, which a lot of people do these days, the most popular finishes at the moment are completely matte. The fashion is now, but an unfinished look. People want a raw timber look, but they want the protection and the enhancement and all those things that I said about it. But effectively, it looks like an unfinished piece of timber. And so clear matte of the hard wax soil is the way I would go. And it's also a dining table. It's going to be an everyday use. It's going to need to be quite robust. With 3 coats of that stuff, it's pretty brilliant. Okay. And yours?
You just staircase.
Yep.
There's a museum behind.
Okay, nice.
It's nice wood. They're not steel.
Right.
One of the accounts feature it's actually toggle wrap at the moment to protect it from.
Yeah, again.
So with the hard wax oil.
I was just going to say, hard wax oil, you can do. Yeah, so this piece here is hard wax oil, and I've used a floor specific wax. So the floor wax is obviously designed not to be too slippery. If you put this wax on it, it's going to be murder and socks. That wasn't a tip, by the way. But this is a matte clear wax, and it's floor specific. On a staircase, that's probably what I would use. Hard wax oil on its own is more than good enough if you didn't want that extra process.
It's for the postcodes.
So as they're not high traffic. Right. Okay. So for those then, I would probably, again, it comes down to preference. Hard wax oil is going to be the first thing that we put on. So once it's done, you can look at it and go, is that, if it looks good enough already, and you've used these abrasive things that I talked about, the grey one in particular, for rubbing back between the coats, it just gets rid of any dust that's settled from the atmosphere as it was wet, really, that's all. And it will, to a certain extent, iron out any brush strokes, although the one thing I'll say about that product, given its drying time of 6 to 8 hours, it self-levels really, really well. So don't I should have maybe talked about that a bit more. Don't over-brush it. If you think, I can really see where I've been there, like I was talking about the French polish, you don't want to see where you've been already. Don't be tempted to keep going back over and over and over it, because you'll actually you start to put air bubbles on it. So just do it till it's covered and leave it, walk away. And it will settle beautifully well, and then let it harden, and then go in with one of these, and any marks that are there will be ironed out. But it really is a good product. It's the same with Osmo, whether it's Fiddes Osmo or Liberon or Tretex. There's so many. They're all based on the same ingredients, but the colours and the variants they're all different. So again, it might be that you need to experiment, but Fiddes is my favourite, not just because it's sold next door to where I live, so it's just really nice. It is a really nice, easy to use product. Yeah, exactly. That is your base. That's a hard finish. So anytime you are mixing finishes, you've always got to go with a hard setting finish first. If you go with a wax first and then you decide to put a hard finish on, anytime that then does what I said it could do in warmer weather, that's going to start to move, and then that hard finish is going to start to crack. You'll end up with these very fine little sort of crackle glaze marks, which is an effect that some people like. I don't. It looks like a failure, isn't it? And hard setting finish first, and then soft finish on the top. So that's kind of the rule to stay with me. But I would just try hard wax oil, and I think you'll probably find that 2 coats is enough.
Would you ever put something like Rubio or hard wax oil over a French polish to give it more protection than having to keep going over the flame?
I haven't, and I wouldn't, but it's a good point. I think French polish is one of those finishes. I don't know how they would react. I might do that as an experiment, actually, just to see. I think, even though they're both hard finishes, so in theory, you can do that. You can put a hard finish on top of another one. I know people that are French polished. I've had pieces of furniture brought into the workshop where I can see that someone's French polished over a more, like I mentioned earlier, that looks like it had a sort of early 20th century finish on it, more of a sort of varnish. That does the same thing. It goes to that crackling thing. It's just not quite compatible. So I think they wouldn't be quite compatible, even though, in theory, you're right. You can put a hard finish onto a hard finish.
It won't be like putting shellac on shellac, but straight polish onto the bottom.
No.
Because if you grip a little bit after it works onto your work, it's really
it's like burning through it
together.
That's right.
That won't do this. It won't do that reaction.
No, I shouldn't think so, because it's not going to be based. That's not methylated spirits. It's just the methylated spirits in the polish that eat through. It's not necessarily, if you took pure shellac, although it's made with a bit of spirit just to get it into a liquid. But I think, to answer your question, I think that they're not going to be quite compatible enough. I think French polish is one of those things. It's such a lovely finish to use that you have to accept that it isn't as robust as some of those more modern finishes are. It's just one of those. The benefits are its beauty and its, the putting on of it for me. It's a really enjoyable job. But the drawbacks are it isn't quite as robust. If you put a hot pan on that, it's wrecked. Whereas some of these, and then again, someone mentioned worktop services and kitchen worktops. I made my own. I made my own kitchen. I made the worktop to go with it, and I hard waxed all of those. The one around the sink in particular, yes, it's starting. It gets splashed every more than multiple times a day, and it's starting even though it's only 6 months old. Probably that one. The rest of it's a couple of years old now. It's starting to show signs, but I know that I can get some sort of cleaner that the hard wax oil manufacturers make their own cleaner, and it's worth it's a lot of money. But I've tried other stuff, and it actually is the best stuff. Clean it back and then give it another coat after a year, and you will get rid of those marks. Burn marks, or say, as they're oak, and if you get metal, anyone that's ever worked with oak, you leaves a sort of, especially non-ferrous metal on there, it turns black. It's disastrous. But with oxalic acid, you wash that over and they all just completely disappear. Now that's something that I can recommend to the home user. It's not a corrosive acid, it's toxic. You don't want to drink it, but it's not going to melt through your skin. It comes from rhubarb roots, actually. That's what makes rhubarb roots toxic.
Yeah.
And it's even manufactured from rhubarb roots today in massive quantities. But if you buy it, I think they sell it here. I'm not 100% sure, but you can Google it and buy it in kilogram tubs. It's a crystal. And just put it in again, teaspoon at a time into warm water, and you just rub gloves, but rub the solution over the whole thing. Don't localize it because you'll end up with a bleached patch. But if you've got black marks or really, red wine stains, for example, go over the whole surface. That's gone. Neutralize it with bicarbonate of soda. It's an acid, so use a mild alkali, and then you can go back over with your hard wax oil again. So any of these things that do have a slight weakness in them, it's always easy to get over. And I think that they're still better. The amount of furniture I made, beautiful pieces that went into these amazing places, One Hyde Park or Claridge's, or all the different places I've been lucky enough to make furniture for. They insist on having a sprayed finish. So it leaves me, I don't touch that. I don't do these spray lacquers, these polyurethane lacquers or these cellulose lacquers. Just not what I do. But they always do that. And then they chip or they it might get a scratch on it. Someone might say, look, it's a hotel. People can come in and dump stuff on the top. They're unrestorable. That's the thing. That's the drawback. Yes, they are harder. Yes, you can put a hot pan on it. Yes, you can spill a glass of neat vodka on it or whatever. It's going to withstand that, which these might not as much. But once it's damaged in the tiniest way, they're unrestorable. It's literally a complete strip back to the bare surface and start again. And I just think, and then you end up, if you ever strip from those, it literally comes off in a sheet of plastic. It's like thick cling film, and it just goes in the bin. And I don't know. I try and be as environmentally conscious as I can. I make things out of trees, so I'm kind of on a bit of a inspiration straight away. But I try and do things with as much conscience as possible. And antique restoration is made to remember its very essence, still kind of gives back in that respect. Any other questions? I'd say I won't go right the way until 7 o'clock because, as much as, I'm happy to take questions, I'll be here till 7. But don't forget that obviously there's the discounted, it's going to be like supermarket sweep on it. Leave space for that, for going and shopping. Because the prices, again, I'm not affiliated to these guys. I've got nothing to gain by advertising them, but their prices are already good. So with a discount, it's going to be real competitive, I think. So make sure if you're going to buy anything, that I'm giving time for that. But I hope that's informative. I try and cover as much as possible. I try and sort of go off in different directions if people ask questions and help everyone who's got a specific thing they want to know. And
going to say, you talk about those colours there where you mix the additives.
Yeah.
I use the Prozac.
Oh yeah.
And I was lucky enough, someone gave me a big sample of Prozacs. Those colours are stunning.
Yeah.
And the paint is actually, I know it's damn expensive.
It is. This is as well.
One coat.
That's fine.
The next day, you go rub and off again.
Yeah.
And you 2 or 3 coats, and it's finished. And the finish is stunning.
It is. A lot of those finishes.
No mixing, like you said about the drying time for that.
Yeah.
I'll
give it a go. I haven't given it a go actually. But I will give it a go.
Yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah. Well, this is. They were talking about it. It's, in the 60, 70, 80 quid bracket for a fairly small amount. But when you look at how many square meters you get in that, in fact, it's one coat. it's only a little. It's only 5 or 10% more expensive than a hard wax soil, and they're quite expensive, but you get what you pay for. I've used them for a long time, and I do always try and be open-minded. Sometimes I've got a habit of sticking to what I know, and why wouldn't I? But I try and be open-minded. I had an interior designer come to me and she said, right, I want you to do this, make all this stuff, but I want it finished in this. And I kind of was I wanted to fight against that. If you come to me, you come to me because you know what I do. But no, come on, let's give it a go. And it was a water-based acrylic, a bit like the chestnut products that they do. It was polyvines that happened. But I really enjoyed it. I really found it to be a good finish. And she wanted a very specific order as well. Clear first and then white and then clear again. And she'd obviously seen it. And it produced a really nice, again, it wasn't dissimilar to this. It was a sort of limed but not really strong effects. But once that sets, it goes up. And I poured water on it and left it overnight in my workshop. And I came back and wiped it up in the morning. And it was absolutely spotless. So sometimes, we need to be more open-minded. But it is expensive. But I think if you can use it in the correct way, not wastefully, then you'll find that actually it's.
Well, I was saying, it just seems easier to use the other one.
Yeah, well, I'll give it a go.
You do have to mix. And the only thing I say back there, they've got oak, light oak and dark oak.
Yeah.
That's the closest I would say that I've seen come to oak. Because most of them are that, to be honest. When you put it up against oak, you see they're not the same colour.
No, that's
They're
fine.
not very good on colours. That's not perfect, but it's really close.
Right, that's interesting.
Really close to oak. Yeah, I can't feel them.
I will give it a go. I like it. I like to kind of know what's out there.
Yeah.
And what is that an oil-based thing, or is it a...
No, they do. They do. When they're biggest thing, they do fencing and all sorts. I've talked to someone when the COVID was on. They went from they're based in Shepsabala. They ended up normally there's 6 working there in the factory. I think they had 25. And they're supplying feed all these people with paints. Couldn't keep up with it.
You learn your son-in-law's business again, though.
Yeah. It's on the shelves.
Oh, I see.
That's all like samples. Sorry, those I got samples. Really good stuff. They sell it here.
Oh, I will give it a go. Spike, there you go. Surreptitious nature of the service. Right, well, I'm going to start packing up, I think, now. Like I said, I hope everyone found that. Yeah. I mean, I've just left that on, so actually, I will put that up a tiny bit. Why just take off the top clips and you start to see that? It's kind of like very soft. Just like two coats as opposed to one. Do any more? You've got a cat. Again, it's just one of those rotaries, so that's just squarely, sort of program. So enhances it further, I can't find it pressed on there, but you just see it start to build up on the surface a bit more, but here that was just a bare piece of oak, so that was like that, and it's just got a water-based stain on it, and then it's got the liming wax straight on the top, so that is just stone and wax. And as I say, if I was doing that for traffic on it, I'd probably put a hard finish on there first, and then put the liming wax in, just so that if you do get water on it, that stains like that. Not if it's buffed off properly. I mean, yes, to a point, but if you buff it properly, it shouldn't do. That's a sign of a good wax it. Because I've seen some people that layer it on so thick and it does, it's just a dust manual.
And then to clean, that's on a kitchen floor, away for trumpet. On a regular basis.
I would use it in the rock on it. No, nothing water based, but there are proper janitorial type things that are for wax surfaces. Yeah, you don't have to do it with a machine. Not everyone's got one of those, but if you were I quite often use the mops you can buy just with the sort of interchangeable X. You can not supermarket, but on janitorial places you get them with this kind of surface on them. That's really useful then. You just use a wax based thing to but even though I do use wax on the floors, it's not my number one go-to finish.
Onto this.
It would give some wax. Yeah, like 2 coats of wax on there. As long as you're quick, you've got to act quickly. Blot it first. It's the same with any window. Drop anything on it. Blot it with whatever, tea towel or a kitchen roll. And then leave it to dry. Once you've got the majority of it off, leave it to dry. And it should be alright. As I said, using it for thousands of years, it's one of the earliest finishes out there. That's alright. No problem. Nice to see you again. Yeah. Nice to see you. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'm used to setting up the night, but I managed to cover up
Oh, right. Oh, nice one.
There's some of the through, and then it came down in the next slide and left the top.
Blimey, that's a good thing, wasn't it?
Yeah,
We might have left our bedroom skylight.
that must be the
Yeah, exactly.
That was very much.
No, I was going to say.
So, it's going to come down. Well, it cost me just once a year. If I can hear it, so that's what it goes.
Right.
To do the locus.
Yeah.
They've only been down a couple of times, and it's been a bit slower than normal.
Yeah.
Just rock up and get a step on now.
No, I was going to say,
But
anytime you like, no, certainly can have. I'm there most of the time. Certainly, anytime you are coming back,
yeah.
well, I've sent me a text just to make sure I'm actually in. So I do work on site like this. So,
Yeah.
no, you always work on Joe Lowe's?
Yeah, she's fine. Yeah, she's just gone back.
Oh, great. Oh, brilliant. I got Joe's card after I sold that piece. It's really nice. I've still got it. It's sort of piece.
We're still really pleased.
Yeah, good.
Or do you master taking it apart?
Just wondering whether there's any sort of
Shouldn't need it. Just no. It should be good, but unless it's high traffic, it should be good for a long time. If you do, just a dry dust. But if you do need to, you want just the lightest tip. I would use a brush. It'd be really using a pot. Quite a lot on it. Just literally dropped into the wax on the lightest touch, and then leave it off. That's all it should be.
I can remember you demonstrated.
Oh yeah. It's difficult to know what to do. Some, there's quite a few people that, in fact, mostly like, there's quite a few returning people. I don't think go over some of them.
There is just one question. The shrivels on the edge of the door front.
Yeah.
One of those you could also have is the best one to bring that back or just use that. What you would stick or
No, I mean that would be the quickest. It wouldn't be a total crime, but if you can get it, they sell it here. Why can't they do? There's a brand called Typhon who make they're American. They make They do a brown bottle. It's usually this small bottle with liquid high. So it's animal-based liquid like I would use. I've got a blue pot, so blue pot. But it's that, and it's in a pot, and it takes an age to go off. You need probably a little bit of low-tap masking tape, a sort of frog tape, to just hold it down, and then you can wait 24 hours. That's the thing I think.
Right.
I don't know if you've got any engineered speeder games.
Yes,
I use those just to sort of squirt hot glue on there and just sort of feed it under gently, so you shouldn't need to feel it up too much. Because otherwise it's hang it off. But look, it's one of those things with furniture. I go around and I give it a really strong thumb test. Anything that comes off, I glue back on. Anything that doesn't, I leave it. Well, with old glue, things are going to start to come off. It's just one of those things.
I just wondered whether it could be when you have a hot stove.
Yeah, it does.
Then you clean it during the night.
So if they've got it, if not, Google it. Type one click without it. It's a good thing to have in your arms.
Yeah.
It's reversible, right? Keep really good. But it's kind of just not that's
Yeah, that's one thing. It just doesn't feel right to do it.
No, that's it. No, just want a bit of that. Am I just going to speak to this?
Yes, of course, yes.
Yeah,
That's all right.
nice to see you again.
You too,
Yeah,
Jamie.
I'll put glove on there, but it's better than underneath it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Nice to see you.
I will drop in.
Yeah, do it.
Yes. Yeah, I'll send you a text first.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jamie. You too. Cheers for the back.
Right. Yeah, good on.
Yeah. I work for a hotel, right?
Yeah,
COVID, yeah. Right, so it's like, absolutely destroyed everything. So now I've got to try and get everything back up to scratch. We've had a much polish come in, he's taken away the bits that I can swap them into. Now I've got a load of stuff that I can't move, or I can't take it out, and I can't swap it.
yeah.
What's something I can do? It doesn't have to be that, it doesn't need to be.
I would
polished as much as I'd love to.
Yeah.
I
I mean, really, remember what the best thing we can do, or is a couple of things of that. It's like I did on which bit was it? I mean, this isn't an example of the finest of my work, by the way. This was a sort of quick demo, but that's
that was just the.
that's just the Vita shine. Yeah, so that's really
not
good.
Seemed like it quite big.
So it's timber equivalent, brasso. You know that
Yeah.
it's brasso, so it's effectively some sort of solvent. Right. I'm not sure what it is, but it's got a powder, an abrasive powder, so it's going to take off a fine layer. So anything that is on there that you don't want to be, it will take that off. So they do sell things back. You can't get it, just Google it. There's suppliers online that sell it. But the wax, either of those, I mean, that would probably be my first port of call. Because all that sanitizer spray is going to suck all the good stuff out of that timber. So this is going to nourish it again, whereas this isn't. So you might go for that first, but if you want something that's quick and just a one-coat wonder, then that is going to nourish the timber back up again. It's got beeswax on it, so it's actually going to feed that timber that's going to dry out. It'll colour it back again as well. So if you get again, try and match the timber to the wax colour. Oak furniture use oak, the mahogany use mahogany.
Would you? So some of them are, almost bare wood in the centre, and then it fades out, and then by the time you get to the back, sort of French. What would you do in that situation? Would you use just straighten it, try and blend everything?
Yeah, really, you're looking at a big restoration job there, and you're looking at. I mean,
the other thing is, 4 hours to get these things done. Between checkout and checkout.
That's good stuff, is it? Yeah.
That laptop was.
You're up against it there, as you know.
Yeah.
That again, I think that's going to make a big difference. If you've got a massive amount of foam, on the underside of that is going to be great. That's about as good an example as I'm going to give you.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you with this. That wouldn't do anything for that at all. Because you need that is just a braved, a polished surface. So you want some French polish on there. Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if it's gone back to bare timber, really it would need French polish. And it sounds like to me, if that was in my workshop, I would mess the whole lot back so the whole thing is an even surface.
Yeah.
And then I'd go in with a little bit of stain because a lot of that colour is going to be lifted out. So you're going to get stain, then French polish, then wax, if you have the time that you haven't. So quite honestly, I'll see what you can do with this. And saw that bit of that I worked on. Yeah. So here we are. That's sun bleach. That has been in my garden. I've been so for years, and then I thought, I better put all this inside. So let's just put that on there.
So if we were to like the whole top and get it back to an even.
Yeah, that's going to get it. That is going to get it back to bare timber.
How long would that take to let it dry?
Almost instantly.
Are they quite? Yeah.
Almost instantly. Yeah. I mean, I've got some with me, so I'll just. No, I haven't. I still get worked right up until the minute I had to come here tonight. So I quick shower and I downstairs. If I poured a bit of mess on that one and just rubbed it in, it would dry almost instantaneously. And it's so spirited. It's really, really. I mean, it's like 100% alcohol basically. That's it. With not quite the same.
I mean, that's made.
It's made a big difference. And I'll buff it straight away just so that we've got really light touch on the buffer set when we're taking it all back up again.